overcoming the fear, shaking off the vertigo, I became aware that I was back at the falls. Across from me, under a rocky overhang, was my pack, lying exactly where I had placed it earlier. I looked around. No sign of Will. What had happened? Where did he go? According to my watch, less than an hour had passed since Will and I had entered the other dimension, and as I thought about the experience, I was struck with how much love and calm I had felt, and how little anxiety, until now. Now everything around me seemed dull and muted. Wearily I walked over and picked up my pack, fear welling up in my stomach. Sensing too much exposure in the openness of the rocks, I decided to walk back into the hills to the south until I could decide what to do. When I had crested the first hill and started down the slope, I spotted a small man, perhaps 50 years old, walking up to my left. He had red hair and a thin goatee and wore hiking clothes. Before I could hide, he spotted me and headed straight my way. When he reached me, he smiled cautiously and said, "I'm afraid I'm turned around a bit. Could you direct me back to town?" I gave him directions south to T. He Spring and then on to the main stream, which he could follow west to the ranger's station. He appeared relieved. I ran into someone east of here, earlier, who told me how to get back, but I must have made a wrong turn. Are you also heading toward town? Looking closely at the expression on his face, I seemed to pick up a sadness and anger in his personality. I don't think so, I said. I'm looking for a friend who is out here somewhere. What did the person you met look like? It was a woman with blonde hair and bright eyes, he replied. She talked rapidly. I didn't catch her name. Who are you looking for? Charlene Billings. Is there anything else about the woman you saw that you can remember? She said something about the national forest that made me think she might be one of those searcher types that hang out around here. But I couldn't tell. She warned me to leave the valley. She told me she had to get her gear and then she was leaving also. She seemed to think something was wrong out here, that everyone was in danger. She was actually very secretive. Frankly, I didn't know what she was talking about. His tone suggested he was accustomed to speaking with directness. As friendly as possible, I said. It sounds as if the person you met could have been my friend. Where did you see her exactly? He pointed toward the south, and told me he had run into her about half a mile back. She had been walking alone and had headed southeast from there. I'll walk with you as far as the spring, I said. I picked up my pack, and as we walked down the hill, he asked if that was your friend. Where do you think she was going? I don't know. Into some mystical space, perhaps. Looking for utopia. He was smiling cynically. I realized he was baiting me. Maybe, I said. Don, you believe in the possibility of utopia? No, of course not. It's Neolithic thinking. Naive. I glanced at him, fatigue beginning to overwhelm me, trying to end the conversation. Just a difference of opinion, I guess. He laughed. No, it's fact. There's no utopia coming. Everything is getting worse out there, not better. Economically, things are swinging out of control, and eventually it will explode. Why do you say that? It's simple demographics. For most of this century there has been a large middle class in the Western countries, a class who have promoted order and reason and carry a general faith that the economic system could work for everyone. But this faith is beginning to collapse now. You can see it everywhere. Fewer people every day now believe in the system, or play by the rules. And it's all because the middle class is shrinking. Technological development is making labor valueless and splitting human culture into two groups, the haves and the have-nots, those who have investments and ownership in the world economy and those who are restricted to menial, service jobs. Couple this with the failure of education and you can see the scope of the problem. That sounds awfully cynical, I said. It's realistic. It's the truth. For most people it takes more and more effort just to survive out there. Have you seen the surveys on stress? Tension is off the scale. Nobody feels secure. And the worst hasn't even begun yet. Population is exploding, and as technology expands even more, the distance will grow between the educated and the uneducated, and the haves will control more and more of the global economy, while drugs and crime will continue to soar with the have-nots. And what do you think, he continued, will happen in the underdeveloped countries? Already much of the Middle East and Africa is in the hands of religious fundamentalists whose aim is to destroy organized civilization, which they think is a satanic empire, and replace it with some kind of perverted theocracy. where religious leaders are in charge of everything and they have the sanctioned power to condemn to death those they consider heretics, anywhere in the world. What kind of people would agree with this kind of butchery in the name of spirituality? Yet they are increasing every day. China still practices female infanticide, for example. Do you believe that? I'm telling you, law and order and respect for human life are on their way out. The world is degenerating into a mob mentality, ruled by envy and revenge and led by shrewd charlatans, and it's probably too late to stop it. But do you know what? Nobody really cares. Nobody. The politicians won't do anything. All they care about is their personal fiefdoms, and how to retain them. The world is changing too fast. No one can catch up. And that makes us just look out for number one and get whatever we can as fast as we can, before it's too late. This sentiment permeates the whole of civilization and every occupational group. He took a breath and looked at me. I had stopped on the crest of one of the hills to view the impending sunset, and our eyes met. He seemed to realize he had gotten carried away with his tirade. And in that moment he began to look deeply familiar to me. I told him my name and he responded with his, Joel Lipscomb. We looked at each other for another long moment, but he offered no indication that he knew me. Why had we met in this valley? As soon as I had formulated that last question in my mind, I knew the answer. He was voicing the vision of fear that Williams had mentioned. A chill ran through me. This was supposed to happen. I looked at him with a new seriousness. Do you really think things are that bad? Yes, absolutely, he replied. I'm a journalist, and you can see this attitude playing out in our profession. In the past we at least attempted to do our job with certain standards of integrity. But no longer. It's all hype and sensationalism. No one's looking for the truth anymore or trying to present it in the most accurate way. Journalists are looking for the scoop, the most outrageous perspective, every bit of dirt they can dig up. Even if particular accusations have a logical explanation, they are reported anyway, for their impact on ratings and circulation. In a world where the people are numbed and distracted, the only thing that sells is the unbelievable. And the pity is that this kind of journalism is self-perpetuating. A young journalist looks at this situation and thinks that to survive in the business he has to play the game. If he doesn't, he thinks he'll be left behind, ruined. Which is what leads to so-called investigative reports being intentionally faked. It happens all the time. We had proceeded south and were making our way down the rocky terrain. Other occupational groups suffer from the same condition, Joel went on. God, look at attorneys. Perhaps there was a time when being an officer of the court meant something, when the participants in the process shared a common respect for the truth, for justice. But no longer. Think about the recent celebrity trials covered by television. Lawyers now do everything they can to subvert justice, intentionally. Trying to convince jurors to believe the hypothetical when there is no evidence, hypotheticals that the attorneys know are lies, just to get someone off. And other attorneys comment on the proceedings as though these tactics are common practice and absolutely justified under our system of law, which is not true. Under our system, everyone is entitled to a fair trial. But the lawyers are beholden to ensure fairness and correctness, not to distort the truth and undermine justice simply to get their client off at all costs. Because of television, at least we've been able to see these corrupt practices for what they represent. Simple expediency on the part of trial lawyers to enhance their reputations in order to command higher fees. The reason they're so blatant is that they think no one cares. And obviously no one does. Everyone else is doing the same thing. We're cutting corners, maximizing short-term profits instead of planning long-term, because inside, consciously or unconsciously, we don't think our success can last. And we're doing this even if we have to break the spirit of trust we have with others and advance our own interests at the expense of someone else. Pretty soon all the subtle assumptions and agreements that hold civilization together will be totally subverted. Think what will happen once unemployment gets to a certain level in the inner cities. Crime is out of control now. Police officers aren't going to keep risking their lives for a public that doesn't notice anyway. Why find yourself on the stand twice a week getting grilled? Led by some attorney who's not interested in the truth anyway, or worse, writhing in pain while your lifeblood runs out on the ground in some dark alley somewhere, when no one cares. Better to look the other way and do your 20 years as quietly as possible, maybe even take a few bribes on the side. And it goes on and on. What's going to stop it? He paused and I glanced back at him as we walked. I guess you think some spiritual renaissance is going to change all this? He asked. I sure hope so. He struggled over a fallen tree to catch up with me. Listen, he continued, I bought into this spirituality stuff for a while. This idea of purpose and destiny and insights. I could even see some interesting coincidences happening in my own life. But I decided it was all crazy. The human mind can imagine all sorts of silly things. We don't even realize we're doing it. When you get right down to it, all this talk of spirituality is just weird rhetoric. I started to counter his argument but changed my mind. My intuition was to hear him out first. Yeah, I said, I guess it sometimes sounds that way. Take for instance the talk I've heard about this valley, he went on. That's the kind of nonsense I used to listen to. This is just a valley full of trees and bushes like 1,000 others. He put his hand on a large tree as we passed. You think this national forest is going to survive? Forget it. With the way humans are polluting the oceans, and saturating the ecosystem with man-made carcinogenics, and consuming paper and other wood products, this place will become a garbage bin, like everywhere else. In fact, no one cares about trees now. How do you think the government gets away with building roads in here at taxpayer expense and then selling the timber at below market value? Or swapping the best, most beautiful areas for ruined land somewhere else, just to make the developers happy? You probably think something mystical is happening here in this valley. And why not? Everyone would love for there to be something mystical going on, especially considering the diminishing quality of life. But the fact is, there's nothing esoteric happening. We're just animals, crossing. Each are smart enough and unlucky enough to have figured out we're alive, and we're going to die without ever knowing any purpose. We can pretend all we want and we can wish all we want, but that basic existential fact remains, we can't know. I looked back at him again. Don't you believe in any kind of spirituality? He laughed. If a god exists, he must be an exceedingly cruel monster of a god. Here couldn't be a spiritual reality operating here. How could there be? Look at the world. What kind of god would design such a devastating place where children die horribly by earthquakes and senseless crimes and starvation? When restaurants toss out tons of food every day. Although, he added, perhaps that's the way it's supposed to be. Perhaps that's God's plan. Maybe the end times scholars are correct. They think life and history are all just a test of faith to see who will win salvation and who won't, a divine plan to destroy civilization in order to separate the believers from the wicked. He attempted a smile, but it quickly faded as he drifted into his own thoughts. Finally he quickened his pace to walk up even with me. We were entering the sage meadow again, and I could see the crow tree 1/4 of a mile away. Do you know what these end times people really believe is happening? He asked. I did a study of them several years ago, they're fascinating. Not really, I said, nodding for him to go on. They study the prophecies hidden in the Bible, especially in the book of Revelation. They believe that we live in what they call the last days, the time when all the prophecies will come true. Essentially what they think is this: history is now set up for the return of the Christ and the creation of the heavenly kingdom on earth. But before this can occur, the earth has to suffer a series of wars, natural disasters, and other apocalyptic events predicted in the scriptures. And they know every one of these predictions, so they spend their time watching world events very closely, waiting for the next event on the timetable. What's the next event? I asked. A peace treaty in the Middle East that will allow the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. Sometime after that, according to them, a massive rapture will begin among true believers, whoever they are, and they will be snatched off the face of the earth and lifted into heaven. I stopped and looked at him. They think these people will begin to disappear. Yeah, that's in the Bible. Then comes the tribulation, which is a 7-year period when all hell breaks loose for whoever is left on earth. Apparently everything is expected to fall apart. Giant earthquakes destroy the economy, ocean levels destroy many cities, plus rioting and crime and the rest of it. And then a politician emerges, probably in Europe, who offers a plan to pull things back together, if, of course, he's set up with supreme power. This includes a centralized electronic economy which coordinates commerce in most parts of the world. To participate in this economy, however, and take advantage of the automation, one has to swear allegiance to this leader and have a chip implanted in one's hand, through which all economic interactions are documented. This Antichrist at first protects Israel and facilitates a peace treaty, then attacks later, starting a world war that ultimately involves the Islamic nations, Russia, and finally China. According to the prophecies, just as Israel is about to fall, the angels of God swoop down and win the war, installing a spiritual utopia that lasts 1,000 years. He cleared his throat and looked at me. Walk through a religious bookstore sometime and look around. There are commentaries and novels about these prophecies everywhere, and more coming out all the time. Do why? Oh, you think these end times scholars are correct? He shook his head. I don't think so. The only prophecy that's being played out in this world is man's greed and corruption. Some dictator might rise up and take over. But it will be because he saw a way to take advantage of the chaos. Do you think this will happen? I don't know, but I'll tell you one thing. If the collapse of the middle class continues, and the poor get poorer and the inner cities get more crime infested and spread into the suburbs, and then on top of that we experience, say, a series of big natural disasters and the whole economy crashes for a while. We'll have bands of hungry marauders preying on the masses and total panic everywhere. In the face of this kind of violence, if someone comes along and proposes a way to save us, to straighten things out, asking only that we surrender some civil liberties, I have no doubt that we'll do it. We stopped and drank some water from my canteen. 50 yards ahead was the crow tree. I perked up. Far in the background I could detect the faint dissonance of the hum. Joel's eyes squinted in concentration, watching me closely. What are you hearing? I turned around and faced him. It's a strange noise. A hum we've been perceiving. I think it may be some kind of experiment going on in the valley. What kind of experiment? Who's conducting it? Why can't I hear it? I was out to tell him more when we were interrupted by another sound. We listened carefully. That's a vehicle, I said. 2 more gray jeeps were approaching from the west and heading toward us. We ran behind a patch of tall briars and hid. And they passed within 100 yards without stopping, heading southeast along the same path the earlier jeep had followed. I don't like this, Joel said. Who was that? Well, it's not the Forest Service, and no one else is supposed to be driving in here. I think it must be the people involved with the experiment. He looked horrified. If you want, I said, you can take a more direct route back to town. Just head southwest toward that ridge in the distance. You'll run into the stream after about 3/4 of a mile and you can follow it west into town from there. I think you can arrive before it gets too dark. You're not coming. Not now. I'm going directly south to the stream and wait a while for my friend. He tensed his forehead. These people couldn't be conducting an experiment without someone in the Forest Service knowing about it. I know. You don't think you can do anything about this, do you? This is something big. I didn't respond. A pang of anxiety rushed through me. He listened for a moment and then moved past me into the valley, walking quickly. He looked back once and shook his head. I watched him until he crossed the meadow and disappeared into the forest on the other side. Then I hurriedly walked toward the south, thinking again of Charlene. What had she been doing out here? Where was she going? I had no answers. Pushing hard, I reached the stream in about 30 minutes. The sun was now completely hidden by the band of clouds at the western horizon, and the twilight cast the woods in ominous gray tones. I was tired and dirty. And I knew that listening to Joel and seeing the jeeps had affected my mood severely. Perhaps I had enough evidence now to go to the authorities, perhaps that was the way I could help Charlene most. Several options danced through my head, all rationalizing my return to town. Because the woods on both sides of the stream were thin, I decided to wade across and make my way into the thicker forest on the other side. Although I knew that area was private property. Once across, I stopped abruptly, hearing another jeep, then broke into a run. 50 feet ahead the land rose quickly into a knob of boulders and outcroppings, 20 feet high. Climbing quickly, I reached the top and accelerated my pace, then leapt upon a pile of large rocks, intending to jump them quickly to the other side. When my foot hit the topmost rock, the huge stone rolled forward, throwing my feet out from under me and starting the whole pile moving. I bounced once on my hip and landed in a small gully, the pile still tumbling my way. Several of the rocks, each 2 or 3 feet in diameter, were careening down, coming squarely for my chest. I had time to roll onto my left side and raise my arms. But I knew I couldn't get out of the way. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a wispy white form moving in front of my body. Simultaneously an unusual knowing came over me that the huge rocks would somehow miss. I closed my eyes and heard them crash on both sides. Slowly I opened my eyes and peered out through the dust, wiping the dirt and rock chips from my face. The rocks were lying neatly beside me. How had that happened? What was that white form? For a moment I looked around the scene, and then behind one of the rocks I saw a slight movement. A small bobcat cub eased around and looked directly into my eyes. I knew it was big enough to have run away, but it was lingering, looking at me. The rising sound of the approaching vehicle finally sent the bobcat scampering into the woods. I jumped to my feet and ran several more steps before landing awkwardly on another rock. A bolt of throbbing pain raced through my whole leg as my left foot gave way. I fell to the ground and crawled the last 2 yards into the trees. I rolled around behind a huge oak as the vehicle pulled up to the stream, slowed for a few minutes, then raced away, again toward the southeast. My heart pounding, I sat up and pulled off my boot to inspect the ankle. It was already beginning to swell. Why this? I thought. As I slid around to stretch out my leg, I observed a woman staring at me from about 30 feet away. I froze as she walked toward me. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice concerned but wary. She was a tall black woman, perhaps 40, dressed in loose-fitting sweat clothes and tennis shoes. Strands of dark hair had pulled out of her ponytail and dangled in the breeze above her temples. In her hand was a small green knapsack. "I was sitting over there and saw you fall," she said. "I'm a doctor. Do you want me to take a look?" "I'd appreciate that," I said dizzily, not believing the coincidence. She knelt down beside me and moved the foot gently, at the same time surveying the area toward the creek. "Are you out here alone?" I told her briefly about looking for Charlene, but left out everything else. She said she had seen no one of that description. As she talked, finally introducing herself as Maya Ponder, I became convinced that she was completely trustworthy. I told her my name and where I lived. When I finished, she said, "I'm from Asheville, although I have a health center, with a partner a few miles south of here. It's new. We also own 40 acres of the valley right here that joins the national forest." She pointed to the area where we were sitting. "And another 40 acres up the ridge to the south." I unzipped a pocket on my hiking pack and pulled out my canteen. "Would you like some water?" I asked. "No thanks, I have some." She reached inside her own pack, retrieved a canteen, and opened the top. But instead of drinking, she soaked a small towel and wrapped my foot, an action that made me grimace in pain. Turning and looking into my eyes, she said, "You've definitely sprained this ankle." "How badly?" I asked. She hesitated. "What do you think?" "I don't know. Let me try to walk on it." I attempted to stand, but she stopped me. "Wait a minute," she said. "Before you try to walk, analyze your attitude. How badly do you think you're hurt?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that very often your recuperation time depends on what you think, not me." I looked down at the ankle. "I think it could be pretty bad. If it is, I'll have to get back to town somehow." "What then?" "I don't know. If I can't walk, I may have to go find someone else to look for Charlene." "Do you have any idea why this accident happened now?" "Not really." "Why does that matter?" "Because, again, very often your attitude about why an accident or illness has happened has an effect on your recuperation." I looked at her closely, well aware that I was resisting. Part of me felt as though I didn't have time for this discussion right now. It seemed too self-involved for the situation. Although the hum had ceased, I had to assume that the experiment was continuing. Everything felt too dangerous and it was almost dark, and Charlene could be in terrible trouble for all I knew. I was also aware of a deep sense of guilt toward Maya. Why would I feel guilty? I tried to shake off the emotion. "What kind of doctor are you?" I asked, sipping some water. She smiled, and, for the first time I saw her energy lift. She had decided to trust me too. "Permit me to tell you about the kind of medicine I practice," she said. "Medicine is changing, and changing rapidly. We don't think of the body as a machine anymore, with parts that eventually wear out and have to be fixed or replaced. We're beginning to understand that the health of the body is determined to a great degree by our mental processes, what we think of life and especially of ourselves, at both the conscious and the unconscious levels. This represents a fundamental shift. Under the old method, the doctor was the expert and healer, and the patient the passive recipient, hoping the doctor would have all the answers. But we know now that the inner attitude of the patient is crucial. A key factor is fear and stress and the way we handle it. Sometimes the fear is conscious, but very often we repress it entirely. This is the brave, macho attitude. Deny the problem, push it away, conjure up our heroic agenda. If we take this attitude, then the fear continues to eat at us unconsciously. Adopting a positive outlook is very important in staying healthy, but we have to engage in this attitude in full awareness, using love, not macho. For this attitude to be completely effective, what I believe is that our unspoken fears create blocks or crimps in the body's energy flow, and it's these blocks that ultimately result in problems. The fears keep manifesting in ever greater degrees until we deal with them. Physical problems are the last step. Ideally, these blocks would be dealt with early, in a preventive way, before illness develops. So you think all illness can ultimately be prevented or cured? Yes, I'm sure we will have longer or shorter lifespans. That's probably up to the Creator, but we don't have to be sick. And we don't have to be the victim of so many accidents. So you think this applies to an accident, like my sprain, as well as to illnesses? She smiled. Yes, in many cases. I was confused. Look, I don't have time for this right now. I'm really worried about my friend. I've got to do something. I know, but I have a hunch this conversation won't take long. If you rush by and disregard what I'm saying, you may miss the meaning of what is obviously quite a coincidence here. She looked at me to see whether I had picked up on her reference to the manuscript. You're aware of the insights? I asked. She nodded. What exactly do you suggest I do? Well, the technique I've had great success with is this. First, we try to remember the nature of your thoughts just prior to the health problem, in your case. The sprain. What were you thinking? What is the fear this problem is revealing to you? I thought for a moment, then said, I felt afraid, ambivalent. The situate ion here in this valley seemed much more sinister than I thought. I didn't feel as though I could handle it. On the other hand, I knew Charlene might need help. I was confused and torn over what to do. So you sprained your ankle? I leaned toward her. Are you saying that I sabotaged myself so I wouldn't have to take action? Isn't that too simple? That's for you to say, not me. But very often it is simple. Besides, the most important thing is not to spend time defending or proving. Just play with it. Try to remember everything you can about where the health problem came from. Explore for yourself. How do I do that? You have to calm your mind and receive this information. Intuitively, prayerfully, however you conceive the process. I resisted again, not sure whether I could relax and clear my mind. Finally I closed my eyes, and for a moment my thoughts ceased, but then a succession of memories of Will and the day's events intruded. I let them go by and cleared my mind again. Immediately I saw a scene of myself at age 10, limping away from a touch football game, well aware that I was faking the injury. That's right, I thought. I used to fake sprains to avoid having to perform under pressure. I had forgotten all about this. I realized that later I began to actually hurt the ankle frequently, in all kinds of situations. As I pondered the memory, another flash of recollection entered my mind. A cloudy scene of myself in another time, feeling cocky, confident, impulsive. Then as I worked in a dark, candlelit room, the door crashed in and I was dragged away in terror. I opened my eyes and looked at Maya. Maybe I have something. I shared the content of my childhood memory, but the other vision felt too vague to be described, so I didn't mention it. Afterward, Maya asked, "What do you think?" I don't know. The sprain seemed the result of pure chance. It's hard to imagine that the accident came from this need to avoid the situation. Besides, I've been in worse situations than this many times and I didn't sprain an ankle. Why did it happen now? She looked thoughtful. Who knows? Perhaps now is the time to see through the habit. Accidents, illness, healing. They're all more mysterious than any of us ever imagined. I believe that we have an undiscovered ability to influence what happens to us in the future, including whether we are healthy, although, again, the power has to remain with the individual patient. There was a reason that I didn't offer an opinion concerning how badly you were hurt. We in the medical establishment have learned that medical opinions have to be offered very carefully. Over the years, the public has developed almost a worship of doctors, and when a physician says something, patients have tended to take these opinions totally to heart. The country doctors of 100 years ago knew this, and would use this principle to actually paint an overly optimistic picture of any health situation. If the doctor said that the patient would get better, very often the Patient would internalize this idea in his or her mind and actually defy all odds to recover. In later years, however, ethical considerations have prevented such distortions. And the establishment has felt that the patient is entitled to a cold scientific assessment of his or her situation. Unfortunately, when this was given, sometimes patients dropped dead right before our eyes. Just because they were told their condition was terminal. We know now that we have to be very careful with these assessments, because of the power of our minds. We want to focus this power in a positive direction. The body is capable of miraculous regeneration. Body parts thought of in the past as solid forms are actually energy systems that can transform overnight. Have you read the latest research on prayer? The simple fact that this kind of spiritual visualization is being scientifically proven to work totally undermines our old physical model of healing. We're having to work out a new model. She paused and poured more water on the towel around my ankle, then continued, I believe the first step in the process is to identify the fear with which the medical problem seems to be connected. This opens up the energy block in your body to conscious healing. The next step is to pull in as much energy as possible and focus it at the exact location of the block. I was about to ask how this was done, but she stopped me. Go ahead and raise your energy level as much as you can. Accepting her guidance, I began to observe the beauty around me and to concentrate on a spiritual connection within, evoking a heightened sensation of love. Gradually the colors became more vivid and everything in my awareness increased in presence. I could tell that she was raising her own energy at the same time. When I felt as though my vibration had increased as much as possible, I looked at her. She smiled back at me. Okay, now you can focus the energy on the block. How do I do that? I asked. You use the pain. That's why it's there, to help you focus. What? Isn't the idea to get rid of pain? Unfortunately, that's what we've always thought, but pain is really a beacon. A beacon, yes, she said, pressing several locations on my foot. How badly does it hurt right now? It's a throbbing ache, but not too bad. She unwrapped the towel. Focus your tension on the pain and try to feel it as much as possible. Determine its exact location. I know where it is. It's in the ankle. Yes, but the ankle is a large area. Where exactly? I studied the throbbing. She was correct. I had been generalizing the pain to the whole ankle. But as my leg was stretched out with the toes of my foot pointed upward, the pain was more precisely centered in the 2p left portion of this joint and about an inch inward. Okay, I said. I've got that. Now place all your attention on that specific area. Be there with all of your being. For a few minutes I said nothing. With total concentration I felt this location in my ankle completely. I noticed that all the other perceptions of my body, breathing, the location of my hands and arms, sticky sweat on the back of my neck, faded far into the background. Feel the pain totally, she reminded. Okay, I said. I'm there. What's happening with the pain? She asked. I still feel it, but it has changed in character or something. It's becoming warmer, less bothersome, more like a tingling. As I talked, the pain began to take on its normal sensation again. What happened? I asked. I believe that pain surveys another function beyond just telling us that something is wrong. Perhaps it also points out exactly where the difficulty is, so that we can follow it into our bodies like a beacon and place our attention and energy in exactly the right spot. It's almost as if both the pain and our concentrated attention can't occupy the same space. Of course, in cases of severe pain, where concentration is impossible, we can use anesthetics to ease the intensity, although I think it's best to leave some pain so that the beacon effect can be utilized. She paused and looked at me. What's next? I asked. Next, she replied, is to consciously send higher divine energy into the exact spot identified by the pain, intending that the love will transform the cells there into a state of perfect functioning. I just stared. Go ahead, she said. Get completely connected again. I'll guide you through it. I nodded when I was ready. Feel the pain with all your being, she began, and now image your love energy going right into the heart of the pain, lifting that exact point of your body, the atoms themselves, into a higher vibration. See the particles take a quantum jump into the pure energy pattern that is their optimum state. Literally feel a tingling sensation in that spot as the vibration accelerates. After pausing for a full minute, she continued. Now, without changing your focus on the point of the pain, begin to feel your energy, the tingle, moving up both legs, through your hips, into your abdomen and chest, and finally into your neck and head. Feel your whole body tingling with the higher vibration. See every organ operating at optimal efficiency. I followed her instructions exactly, and after a few moments my whole body felt lighter, more energized. I held that state for about 10 minutes. Then opened my eyes and looked at Maya. Seeing a flashlight in the darkness, Maya was putting up my tent on a flat area between two pines. Glancing over at me, she said, "Feel better?" I nodded. "Do you understand the process so far?" "I think so. I sent energy into the pain." "Yes, but what we did earlier was just as important. You begin by looking at the meaning of the injury or illness. What its occurrence is pointing out about some fear in your life that is holding you back, manifesting in your body. This is what opens the fear block so that the visualization can penetrate. After the block is open, then you can use pain as a beacon, raising the vibration in that area and then in your entire body. But finding the origin of the fear is vitally important. When the origin of the illness or accident is very deep, it often requires hypnosis or intensive counseling. I told her about the medieval image I had seen of the door being kicked in and of myself being dragged away. She looked thoughtful. Sometimes the root of the block goes back a very long way. But as you explore it further, and begin to work through the fear that is holding you back, you will usually discover a fuller understanding of who you are, of what your current life on earth is all about. And this sets the stage for the last, and, I firmly believe, the most important, step in the healing process. Most important of all is to look deeply enough to remember what you want to do with your life. Real healing takes place when we can envision a new kind of future for ourselves that excites us. Inspiration is what keeps us well. People aren't healed to watch more TV. I looked at her for a moment, then said, "You mentioned that prayer works. How is the best way to pray for someone who is not well?" "We're still trying to figure that out. It has something to do with the eighth insight process of sending the energy and love that flow through us from the divine source to the person, and at the same time visualizing that the individual will remember what they really want to do with their life. Of course, sometimes what the person remembers is that it's time to make a transition into the other dimension. When that's the case, we have to accept it." Maya was finishing with the tent and added, "Also keep in mind that the procedures of recommended should be done in conjunction with the very best in traditional medicine. If we were near my clinic, I would take you in for a full examination, but in this case, unless you disagree, I suggest you stay here tonight. It's better if you don't move much." As I watched, she set up my stove, turned it on, and placed a boiler containing freeze-dried soup on the flame. "I'm going back into town. I need to get a splint for your ankle and some other supplies, just in case we need them. Then I'll hike back out and check on you. I'll bring a radio too, in case we have to send for help." I nodded. She poured her canteen's water into mine and looked over at me. Behind her, the last streak of light was vanishing toward the west. "Did you say your clinic was near here?" I asked. "Actually, it's only about 4 miles to the south," she said, "over the ridge. But there's no way to come into the valley from that direction. The only pass is the main road that comes in south of town." "How did you happen to be here?" She smiled and looked slightly embarrassed. "It's funny. I had a dream last night about hiking into the valley again, and this morning I decided I would do just that. I've been working hard and I guess I needed some time to reflect on what I'm doing at the clinic. My partner and I have a great deal of experience with alternative approaches, Chinese medicine, herbs, yet at the same time, we have the resources of the world's best in traditional medicine at our fingertips through computer. I'd dreamed about this kind of clinic for years." She paused for a moment, then said, "Before you showed up I was sitting right over there. And my energy just shot through the roof. It seemed as though I could see the whole story of my life, every experience I've had, from my early childhood all the way up until this moment, stretched out before me in plain view. It was the clearest sixth insight experience I've ever had. All those events were a preparation," she continued. "I grew up in a family where my mother struggled with chronic disease all her life, but would never participate in her own healing. At the time, the doctors knew no better, but throughout my childhood, her refusal to explore her own fears irritated me, and I noticed every bit of new information about diet, vitamins, stress levels, meditation, and their role in health, trying to convince her to become involved. During my adolescence I was torn between joining the clergy and becoming a doctor. I don't know, it was as if I was driven to figure out how we use insight, faith, to change the future, to heal. And my father, she continued. He was something else. He worked in the biological sciences, but he never would explain any of his results except in his academic papers. Pure research, he called it. His associates treated him like a god. He was unapproachable, the ultimate authority. I was grown, and he had died of cancer, before I understood his real interest, the immune system, and specifically how commitment and excitement with life enhance the immune system. He was the first one to see this relationship, and that's what all the current research shows now. Yet I never got to talk with him about it. At first I wondered why I would be born to a father who behaved like that. But I finally accepted the fact that my parents had the exact combination of traits and interests to inspire my own evolution. That's why I wanted to be with them in my early life. Looking at my mother, I knew that each of us must take responsibility for our own healing. We can't just turn it over to others. Healing in its essence is about breaking through the fears associated with life, fears that we don't want to face, and finding our own special inspiration, a vision of the future that we know we're here to help create. From my father, I saw clearly that medicine must be more responsive. Must acknowledge the intuition and vision of the people we treat. We have to come down from our ivory tower. The combination of the two set me up to look for a new paradigm in medicine. One based on the patient's ability to take control of his or her life and to get back on the right path. That's my message, I guess, the idea that inwardly we know how to participate in our own healing. Physically and emotionally, we can become inspired to shape a higher, more ideal future, and when we do, miracles happen. Standing up, she glanced at my ankle, then at me. I'm leaving now, she said. Try not to put any weight on your foot. What you need is complete rest. I'll be back in the morning. I think I must have looked anxious, because she knelt down again and put both hands on the ankle. Don't worry, she said. With enough energy there's nothing that can't be healed, hatred, war. It's just a matter of coming together with the right vision. She patted my foot gently. We can heal this. We can heal this. She smiled once, then turned and walked away. I suddenly wanted to call out and tell her everything I had experienced in the other dimension and I knew about the fear and about the group coming back, but instead I remained quiet, fatigue overwhelming me, content to watch her disappear into the trees. Tomorrow would be soon enough, I thought, because I knew exactly who she was.